All right, design and planting. So lawn removal, I'm going to talk a little bit about sheet mulching a little bit later on. It's a really great way to get rid of your lawn without removing all of it. So I'll be talking about that in a little bit, okay? Very easy. Design and planting. Good design saves you tons and tons of time. You really want to properly space your plants as you're putting them in. Now, these little 1 gallons are very deceiving. You think, oh, cute little, that's so cute. I mean, that's not going to get very big. Oh no, these do. This is a California buckwheat. Look, tiny, can't get very big. This is going to get 4 feet wide and tall, okay? So, and oh, it's good. This doesn't look like much now, but in a few months, loaded with white blossoms and so attractive to the bees. Really, really good. So when I'm out in a garden and I'm placing plants, I'm literally doing this. I know from fingertip to fingertip is 6 feet, and some of the plants will get to be 6 feet. So I'm going, okay, yep, that'll be about right. So if you don't know how, bring a tape measure and really space your plants properly, because it makes a big, big difference. A lot of times people say, well, I'll prune it to keep it small. No, that you've got more important things to do. Let the plant get to its full size, be who it wants to be. You've got other things to devote your time to. The other thing we want to do is group our plants by hydrozone. What I mean by that is if you have high water plants, say maybe a European birch, the plants underneath the drip line of that birch tree, European birch tree, should be kind of able to take that high water unless you want to lose that birch tree. So if you have a drought-tolerant zone, or say you're taking out your lawn and you want to put all drought-tolerant plants in there, really check and make sure that all the plants that are going in there are low water. We consider things that are low water drought-tolerant, okay? There's a really good resource. I don't know if I'm talking about it here. There's a really good resource called WooCalls. I know I'm going to be talking about it a little bit in the future, a little bit later in the slides. There's a resource online that you can download or you can just look up, and it'll tell you whether your plant is high, medium, low, or very low. So it's super simple to find out what the requirements of all your plants are, okay? So each irrigation zone should have plants that have the same water requirements, okay? That's what we mean by hydrozone. You can fudge, everybody always wants to fudge. You can fudge a little, but it's best if you really just stick with that, okay? You're gonna have to think about the heights a little bit. You don't want a big tall plant blocking a low plant. This is kind of common sense, I would think. Some screening, take advantage of the views, and you really want a well-designed irrigation system. There are, unfortunately, a lot of poorly designed irrigation systems. Spray heads should be head to head, right? Spray heads, head to head. So I just had a client, they put in some lawn, and there's some brown spots. So let's turn on your irrigation system and see how they did. The spray heads were a little off, and so there were some parts that weren't getting watered, okay? So well-designed irrigation system is very important. Planting. It is important to know what type of soil we have. I'm not going to go through this because we all have what? Clay. We all have clay. Occasionally around the bay we'll find people with some sand. There's a ribbon test, there's a canning jar test. You can look those up. The important thing, I'll show you the picture really quick, but the important thing is to know how fast draining. So there's the jar test. You'll get these slides, you can look at that. But the drainage is really important. If you have, especially if you're going to be planting drought-tolerant plants, okay, they need some pretty good drainage. So the drainage is best when it's greater than 1 inch per hour and less than 6 inches per hour. I doubt you're going to get 6 inches per hour. So an easy way to check your drainage, if the soil is moist, which it should be now, your soil is bone dry? I hear you, okay. So if your soil is bone dry, and you can test that, we're going to be talking about moisture meters. We can test that with the moisture meter. But if your soil is bone dry, dig a hole about 12 inches deep, 6 inches wide, something like that. If it's bone dry, wet the soil, fill the hole with water, let it all percolate out, okay? Then fill the hole again with water and time how long it takes to drain, okay? So you can see there's a little measuring stick in there, and you can time it just to make sure that you're getting at least an inch of drainage per hour, okay? So that's going to be sufficient for a lot of our native plants, but some of them are really finicky. So one of the reasons why our native plants can be a little finicky and we have to worry about drainage is, again, Mediterranean climate is cold and wet, warm and dry, right? We only have 2 seasons, cold and wet, warm and dry. Our plants are used to that. These drought-tolerant plants, whether they're Mediterranean or California native, they're used to that. They expect to dry out a little bit in the summertime. If they're warm and wet, they're much more susceptible to crown and root rots, okay? And that can take a plant out really, really fast. And a lot of times people will see the plant, maybe some of the leaves are yellowing, it looks a little stressed, I'm not sure. We water it. Sometimes that's not the right thing to do. But you can prevent a lot of these problems by proper planting, okay? So there are some natives who are really, really susceptible to these rots. A lot of these are chaparral type plants. So besides having a Mediterranean climate, we have a lot of microclimates in California, and different plants grow in different microclimates. But our chaparral type plants, like that California buckwheat there that I said was going to get 4x4, full of white flowers, that's really more of a chaparral plant. It can take that hot and dry. Our woolly blue curls, our Cleveland sages, things that have a lot of like aromatic oils to them. That's one of the ways that you can tell that it's chaparral. Also, if the leaves are kind of gray-green, it's probably a chaparral plant. In that case, they need a little bit better drainage. So flannel bush, ceanothus also. One really easy thing you can do is build up some berms. And these are just little raised mounds in the garden. They're good for a lot of reasons. They're good for, you get a little bit better drainage. They're also a nice design element, okay? Instead of having a flat yard, you can have some little mounded areas which are, just create some interest, okay? I usually do the mounds maybe, I do love a kidney-shaped mound, I have to say, but it doesn't have to be. But a lot of times I'll do a kidney-shaped mound. I'll do like 18 inches maybe on one end and 12 inches on the other end of the kidney shape, And sometimes people will say, oh my God, it's so big. It's like, believe me, once it's all planted and it settles a little bit, the plants grow in, you put a few boulders in there, you hardly notice it. I mean, it really doesn't, you can see that there's a little bit of a mound here, but you really don't notice it. Cleveland sages, this is my yard. I did want a bunch of Cleveland sage. I did put a little bit of a mound. I think I have a later picture that shows the mound a little bit better. Here is a western redbud, and again, you can see it's on a little bit of a mound. It really doesn't look like much, but there's some boulders around it and things, so a mound is really good. Also, if you're taking out lawn, you are going to have some extra soil. Because if you take out lawn, in order to do the sheet mulching and everything, lawn is typically, if this is, say, a sidewalk, the level of lawn is typically the finished grade, or the soil level of lawn is typically the same height as your sidewalk, your driveway, things like that. But you're actually going to want to lower that because you're going to want to put some mulch on top of the soil, and you don't want that mulch higher than the sidewalk and sloughing off onto the sidewalk. So you're actually going to be pulling some soil away from any hardscaping that you have. And then you're going to have some extra soil. You can take it to the dump, but it's really good topsoil, so it's a lot better to make a mound out of it. Okay? Any questions on that? Yes, sir.
Is it okay to put a mound over the root line, like under the drip line of the sycamore tree?
Is it appropriate to put a mound above the drip line of a sycamore tree? Typically, I don't like to do that. If is it a really big sycamore, western sycamore, huge?
Yeah, it's mature.
Mature, I mean, if you could do it, say, on the edge of that, that would be okay. But we don't like to change the level of soil over roots of a big tree, typically because the roots get a lot of air. They also get air, so you're kind of cutting off its air supply a little bit. If it's, I would say if it was maybe 12% of the drip line, so, an eighth of the drip line, that would probably be okay. So kind of to the edge, I think you'd be okay with that. Yes, ma'am.
Is that true for magnolias too? Because I've been trying to plant them. Everything dies.
Okay, yes. I mean, planting under trees, mature trees, is very, very difficult. They have very, very greedy roots. Again, if you had a big magnolia out in the middle of the yard, I would try to do it away, or on the edge of the drip line. We've done talks on gardening under mature trees. It is very difficult, and a lot of times I tell people, pots, 2 pots. I mean, it's just there's so much root competition for plants with those mature tree roots. It's very, very, it's hard even to plant. And especially with a magnolia, the tree roots are pretty high. I have a big magnolia. It's very hard. So that's kind of a special case. Yeah. All right, any other questions about berms? All right, we're going to talk a little bit about, okay, one more. I want to show you a little demonstration on how to plant. There's also a fine gardening article that's online that's very good on clay soil. A lot of times people think, I have clay soil, I should add sand. Don't do it. Don't do it. The best addition is really compost. Compost has a tendency to aggregate. Clay soil has really tiny, tiny, tiny little particles. And if you add compost, it kind of helps those particles to stick together and create more air spaces. So putting in some compost is much, much better. If you add sand to clay soil, you get adobe, like the bricks, right? So you don't want that, all right? So that's a really good. All right, so finally, we're talking a little bit about planting. So one of the things that I always recommend with drought-tolerant plants, you're going to plant them a little bit high. Maybe the crown of the plant an inch high. I'm going to take this one. Let's see. Will I be? Ooh, this one will be better to see. Also, I want to say that, there we go. When you're buying a plant, you're buying roots. You're getting a little bit above ground, but especially drought-tolerant plants, you're really buying a root system. And these plants are very smart. They're not going to put on a lot of above-ground growth until they get their underground root system really in shape, okay? So sometimes people are like, yeah, it's not doing anything. It's like, yeah, it's working on its root system, and as soon as it gets a good root system and it knows it can survive our long, dry summers, then you're going to start to see a lot of growth. This has a very nice root system. I've got a little bit of roots at the bottom, so the can is well filled out. I have some nice roots throughout, so it's pretty solid here, but I don't see a ton of roots all matted in. So this is pretty nice, okay? I would find this very acceptable. And there's nothing wrong with tipping. These plants are expensive, right? A 1 gallon now is starting to be like $13, and if you're buying a bigger plant, say a 5 gallon or a 15 gallon, make them tip it out, of the pot. See what the root system is. Don't wait until you get home to see that, oh, it's, you know, it's all girdled and the root system is really packed in there. This is going to do very well. Okay, so what I'm saying is, a little moss there. Here's the top of that soil line in the can. Okay, so I'm going to want to kind of keep that. When I put a hole, when I dig my hole, I'm going to want the hole to be twice as wide, but not twice as deep. So only as deep as the can of the plant, maybe even a little bit higher, maybe an inch higher, but twice as wide, okay? Because I want some nice fluffy soil on the side so it can start growing out into our, you know, clay soil, okay? So plant it a little bit high. Any questions on that? Yes, ma'am.
So do you have to break that form and just like that?
This one's not too bad. If I wanted to get a little fussy, I could, my pruners, not using the sharp edge, you could kind of maybe tease these out a little bit, but honestly, these are pretty good. So I could tease those out a little bit. Excuse me. If I had a lot on the side, I may do the same up the side in maybe 4 places, and just to kind of open it up a little bit. Now there are some natives that don't like, some plants that don't like their roots disturbed. Very few, though. You're usually pretty good to do that. So, yep. So, wait, her question was, can you tease these out a little bit? And yes, you can, before you put it in. Also, I do talk about putting in a little bit of organic compost. If you had a little compost, I don't think it hurts at all. They don't really need, especially the chaparral plants, they don't really need rich soil. There's some other plants that could use a little bit more richness, things that are from the redwood forest community, those could use a little bit more richness, but most of our chaparral plants, they really don't need a little bit. I like to put a little shot of compost in to kind of get some of the mycorrhiza, some of the soil, fauna and flora in there, so I feel like that really helps. There's a lot of talk of mycorrhiza, you know, the little packets that you can get at the store that have this fungi. Okay, no, don't know that. There are, what we've learned, oh, I'm going to be talking about soil care in a minute, so I'm going to save that. Okay, I'm going to save that topic. So, planting a little bit high, you can throw a little shot of compost in there if you want, not necessary. And then mulch around the plants. Sorry, a little tickle in my throat. Mulch. A lot of times people don't know what I mean when I talk about mulch. Mulch is something that you put on top of the soil. That's it, really. You could do rock mulch, I suppose. I don't like rock mulch. Usually some kind of, let me specify a little bit more. Some kind of organic matter that you put on top of the soil. So typically that's some kind of a wood bark or chipped wood or something that you're using as mulch. Mulch is good because it not only breaks down and enriches the soil, but it also keeps the soil cool and keeps a good moisture level in the soil, so you don't have to water as much, okay? I just want to say one more thing. We have some ground-dwelling bees, and if you could leave a little area, possibly in shade, that was free of mulch, then you'd get more ground-dwelling bees. They don't sting, they don't, you know, they're not harmful at all, but that would be very helpful. Yes, ma'am?
So in terms of mulch, some mulch I noticed doesn't let water go through it, seems to like gorilla hair or whatever.
Yes.
Is it okay just to leave leaves?
Yes, thank you. So she said some mulch doesn't let water go through, and is it okay to leave leaves? So, yes. Before you mulch, if your soil is really, really dry, I would recommend watering before I mulched. If you're using drip, you don't have to do that, because typically the drip is on top of the soil and below the mulch, so that's really good. But if you're using spray, it would be good to have the area watered well before you put the mulch in. Because you're right, it does impede a little bit of the water going in to the soil. And then the question of using leaves. Yes, yes. I think leaves are now my favorite type of mulch. They're free. Leaves were meant, leaves have a lot of nutrition in them. Again, we're going to talk about that in soil care. They have a lot of nutrition. You know, trees are pulling minerals and nutrients from deep in the soil and bringing them, and they're in the leaves. So when we're using those leaves, we're returning that material back to the soil. If you have really large leaves, like sycamore or magnolia or even oak, even things that are kind of leathery, it's going to be good to shred those, and I'll talk about that in a bit as well. So leaves as mulch is really good. And I just want to say one more thing about mulch. In a vegetable bed, I typically like to use compost as mulch. Not necessarily in the garden. You could, if you had azaleas and, again, things that like a little bit more acid or are redwood or something like that, you could use compost, but I usually save my compost for my vegetable bed. All right. Yerba Buena Nursery, they're in Half Moon Bay. They have an excellent website. If you have really heavy clay that you're trying to work with, they have a list on their website of clay-tolerant species. So that's a really nice guide for you. I'm showing just a little bit of it.